Prince Irkun was pleased. His plans went well. He peered through the high fence which enclosed the flat roof of his house, 3 stories high and the finest in Doge Cam. He looked out towards the harbor at his splendid captured fleet. Every ship which had come to Doge Cam and which had not flown the standard of a powerful nation had been easily taken after its crew had looked upon the great mirror which squatted on its pillars above the city. Demons had built those pillars, and Prince Irkun had paid them for their work with the souls of all those in Oin and Yu who had resisted him. Now there was one last ambition to fulfill, and then he and his new followers would be on their way to Melniboné. He turned and spoke to his sister. Cymril lay on a wooden bench, staring unseeingly at the sky, clad in the filthy tatters of the dress she'd been wearing when Irkun abducted her from her tower. "See our fleet, Cymril. While the golden barges are scattered, we shall sail unhampered into Imrir and declare the city ours. Elric cannot defend himself against us now. He fell so easily into my trap. He's a fool, and you were a fool to give him your affection." Cymril made no response. Through all the months she'd been away, Irkun had drugged her food and drink and produced in her a lassitude which rivaled Elric's undrugged condition. Irkun's own experiments with his sorcerous powers had turned him gaunt, wild-eyed, and somewhat mangy. He ceased to take any pains with his physical appearance. But Cymril had a wasted, haunted look to her, for all that beauty remained. It was as if Doge Cam's run-down seediness had infected them both in different ways. "Fear not for your own future, however, my sister. You shall still be empress, and still sit beside the emperor on his ruby throne. Only I shall be emperor, and Elric shall die for many days, and the manner of his death will be more inventive than anything he thought to do to me." Cymril's voice was hollow and distant. She did not turn her head when she spoke. "You are insane, Irkun." "Insane? Come now, sister, is that a word that a true Melnibonéan should use? We Melnibonéans judge nothing sane or insane. What a man is, he is. What he does, he does. Perhaps you have stayed too long in the young kingdoms, and its judgments are becoming yours. But that shall soon be righted. We shall return to the Dragon Isle in triumph, and you will forget all this, just as if you yourself had looked into the mirror of memory." He darted a nervous glance upwards, as if he half expected the mirror to be turned on him. Cymril closed her eyes. Her breathing was heavy and very slow. She was bearing this nightmare with fortitude, certain that Elric must eventually rescue her from it. That hope was all that had stopped her from destroying herself. If the hope went altogether, then she would bring about her own death, and be done with Irkun and all his horrors. "Did I tell you that last night I was successful? I raised demons, Cymril, such powerful dark demons. I learned from them all that was left for me to learn, and I opened the Shade Gate at last. Soon I shall pass through it, and there I shall find what I seek. I shall become the most powerful mortal on earth. Did I tell you all this, Cymril?" He had, in fact, repeated himself several times that morning, but Cymril had paid no more attention to him than she did now. She felt so tired. She tried to sleep. She said slowly, as if to remind herself of something, "I hate you, Irkun." "Ah, but you shall love me soon, Cymril. Soon." "Elric will come." "Elric? Ha! He sits twiddling his thumbs in his tower, waiting for news that will never come, save when I bring it to him." "Elric will come," she said. Irkun snarled. A brute-faced Oynish girl brought him his morning wine. Irkun seized the cup and sipped the stuff. Then he spat it at the girl who, trembling, ducked away. Irkun took the jug and emptied it on the white dust of the roof. "This is Elric's thin blood. This is how it will flow away. But again Cymril was not listening. She was trying to remember her albino lover and the few sweet days they'd spent together since they were children. Yurkun hurled the empty jug at the girl's head, but she was adept at dodging him. As she dodged, she murmured her standard response to all his attacks and insults. "Thank you, Demon Lord. Thank you, Demon Lord." Yurkun laughed. "Aye, Demon Lord. Your folk are right to call me that, for I rule more demons than I rule men. My power increases every day." The Oynish girl hurried away to fetch more wine, for she knew he would be calling for it in a moment. Yurkun crossed the roof to stare through the slats in the fence at the proof of his power, but as he looked upon his ships, he heard sounds of confusion from the other side of the roof. Could the Urits and Oynish be fighting amongst themselves? Where were the Imririan centurions? Where was Captain Valharic? He almost ran across the roof, passing Cymril, who appeared to be sleeping, and peered down into the streets. "Fire?" he murmured. "Fire?" It was true that the streets appeared to be on fire, and yet it was not an ordinary fire. Balls of fire seemed to drift about, igniting rush-thatched roofs, doors, anything that would easily burn, as an invading army might put a village to the torch. Yurkun scowled, thinking at first that he had been careless and some spell of his had turned against him, but then he looked over the burning houses at the river, and he saw a strange ship sailing there, a ship of great grace and beauty, that somehow seemed more a creation of nature than man, and he knew they were under attack. But who would attack Doge Cam? There was no loot worth the effort. It could not be Imririans. It could not be Elric. It must not be Elric. The mirror, it must be turned upon the invaders. "And upon yourself, brother?" Cymril had risen unsteadily and leaned against a table. She was smiling. "You were too confident, Yurkun. Elric comes." "Elric? Nonsense! Merely a few barbarian raiders from the interior. Once they are in the center of the city, we shall be able to use the Mirror of Memory upon them." He ran to the trapdoor which led down into his house. "Captain Valharic! Valharic! Where are you?" Valharic appeared in the room below. He was sweating. There was a blade in his gloved hand, though he did not seem to have been in any fighting as yet. "Make the mirror ready, Valharic. Turn it upon the attackers." "But, my lord, we might—" "Hurry! Do as I say. We'll soon have these barbarians added to our own strength, along with their ships." "Barbarians, my lord? Can barbarians command the fire elementals? These things we fight are flame spirits. They cannot be slain any more than fire itself can be slain." "Fire can be slain by water," Prince Yurkun reminded his lieutenant. "By water, Captain Valharic. Have you forgotten?" "But, Prince Yurkun, we have tried to quench the spirits with water, and the water will not move from our buckets. Some powerful sorcerer commands the invaders. He has the aids of the spirits of fire and water." "You are mad, Captain Valharic, mad. Prepare the mirror, and let us have no more of these stupidities." Valharic wetted his dry lips. "Aye, my lord." He bowed his head and went to do his master's bidding. Again Yurkun went to the fence and looked through. There were men in the streets now, fighting his own warriors, but smoke obscured his view. He could not make out the identities of any of the invaders. "Enjoy your petty victory, for soon the mirror will take away your minds, and you will become my slaves." "It is Elric," said Cymril. "Elric comes to take vengeance on you, brother." "Think you? Think you? Well, should that be the case, he'll find me gone, for I still have a means of evading him, and he'll find you in a condition which will not please him, though it will cause him considerable anguish. But it is not Elric. It is some crude shaman from the steppes to the east of here. He will soon be in my power." Cymril, too, was peering through the fence. "Elric," she said, "I can see his helm." "What?" Yurkun pushed her aside. There in the streets, Imririan fought Imririan. There was no longer any doubt of that. Yurkun's men Imririan, Oynish, and Urit were being pushed back, and at the head of the attacking Imririans could be seen a black dragon helm, such as only one Melnibonéan wore. It was Elric's helm, and Elric's sword that had once belonged to Earl Albak of Malador rose and fell, and was bright with blood which glistened in the morning sunshine. For a moment Irkun was overwhelmed with despair. He groaned, "Elric, Elric, Elric! Ah, how we continue to underestimate each other! What curse is on us?" Cymril had flung back her head, and her face had come to life again. "I said he would come, brother." Irkun whirled on her. "Aye, he has come, and the mirror will rob him of his brain, and he will turn into my slave, believing anything I care to put in his skull. This is even sweeter than I planned, sister. Ha!" He looked up, and then flung his arms across his eyes as he realized what he had done. "Quickly, below, into the house! The mirror begins to turn." There came a great creaking of gears and pulleys and chains as the terrible mirror of memory began to focus on the streets below. "It will only be a little while before Elric has added himself and his men to my strength. What a splendid irony!" Irkun hurried his sister down the steps leading from the roof, and he closed the trapdoor behind him. "Elric himself will help in the attack on Imrir. He will destroy his own kind. He will oust himself from the Ruby Throne." "Do you not think that Elric has anticipated the threat of the Mirror of Memory, brother?" Cymril said. "Anticipated, aye, but resisted he cannot. He must see to fight. He must either be cut down or open his eyes. No man with eyes can be safe from the power of the mirror." He glanced around the crudely furnished room. "Where is Valharek? Where is that cur?" Valharek came running in. "The mirror is being turned, my lord, but it will affect our own men too, I fear." "Then cease to fear. What if our men are drawn under its influence? We shall soon feed what they need to know back into their brains, at the same time as we feed our defeated foes. You are too nervous, Captain Valharek." "But Elric leads them." "And Elric's eyes are eyes, although they look like crimson stones. He will fare no better than his men." In the streets around Prince Irkun's house, Elric, Divim, Tavar, and their Imririans pushed on, forcing back their demoralized opponents. The attackers had lost barely a man, whereas many Oynish and Urits lay dead in the streets, beside a few of their renegade Imririan commanders. The flame elementals, whom Elric had summoned with some effort, were beginning to disperse, for it cost them dear to spend so much time entirely within Elric's plane. But the necessary advantage had been gained, and there was now little question of who would win, as 100 or more houses blazed throughout the city, igniting others, and requiring attention from the defenders lest the whole squalid place burn down around their ears. In the harbor, too, ships were burning. Divim Tavar was the first to notice the mirror beginning to swing into focus on the streets. He pointed a warning finger, then turned, blowing on his war horn and ordering forward the troops, who, up to now, had played no part in the fighting. "Now you must lead us," he cried, and he lowered his helm over his face. The eye holes of the helm had been blocked, so that he could not see through. Slowly Elric lowered his own helm until he was in darkness. The sound of fighting continued, however, as the veterans who had sailed with them from Melniboné set to work in their place, and the other troops fell back. The leading Imririans had not blocked their eye holes. Elric prayed that the scheme would work. Irkun, peering cautiously through a chink in a heavy curtain, said querulously, "Valharek, they fight on. Why is that? Is not the mirror focused?" "It should be, my lord." "Then see for yourself. The Imririans continue to forge through our defenders, and our men are beginning to come under the influence of the mirror. What is wrong, Valharek? What is wrong?" Valharek drew air between his teeth, and there was a certain admiration in his expression as he looked upon the fighting Imririans. "They are blind. They fight by sound and touch and smell. They are blind, my lord emperor, and they lead Elric and his men, whose helms are so designed that they can see nothing." "Blind? Blind?" "Aye, Blind warriors, men wounded in earlier wars, but good fighters nonetheless. That is how Elric defeats our mirror, my lord. Ah, no! No! Elric is not cunning. He is not cunning. Some powerful demon gives him these ideas. Perhaps, my lord, but are these demons more powerful than those who have aided you? No, there are none. Oh, that I could summon some of them now, but I've expanded my powers in opening the Shade Gate. I should have anticipated. I could not anticipate. Oh, Elric, I shall destroy you when the rune blades are mine. But how could he have been prepared? What demon? Unless he summoned Elric himself. But he has not the power to summon Elric. I could not summon him. And then, as if in reply, Irkun heard Elric's battle song sounding from the nearby streets, and that song answered the question. Elric! Elric! Blood and souls for my lord Elric! Then I must have the rune blades. I must pass through the Shade Gate. There I still have allies, supernatural allies, who shall deal easily with Elric if need be. But I need time. Irkun mumbled to himself as he paced about the room. Valharic continued to watch the fighting. They come closer, said the captain. Cymril smiled. Closer, Irkun. Who is the fool now? Elric or you? Be still! I think. Irkun fingered his lips. Then a light came into his eye, and he looked cunningly at Cymril for a second, before turning his attention to Captain Valharic. Valharic, you must destroy the Mirror of Memory. Destroy it? But it is our only weapon, my lord. Exactly, but is it not useless now? Aye. Destroy it, and it will serve us again. Irkun flicked a long finger in the direction of the door. Go! Destroy the mirror. But Prince Irkun, Emperor, will that not have the effect of robbing us of our only weapon? Do as I say, Valharic, or perish. But how shall I destroy it, my lord? Your sword. You must climb the column behind the face of the mirror. Then, without looking into the mirror itself, you must swing your sword against it and smash it. It will break easily. You know the precautions I've had to take to make sure that it was not harmed. Is that all I must do? Aye, then you are free from my service. You may escape or do whatever else you wish to do. Do we not sail against Melniboné? Of course not. I have devised another method of taking the Dragon Isle. Valharic shrugged. His expression showed that he never really believed Irkun's assurances. But what else had he to do but follow Irkun when fearful torture awaited him at Elric's hands? With shoulders bowed, the captain slunk away to do his prince's work. And now, Cymril. Irkun grinned like a ferret as he reached out to grab his sister's soft shoulders. Now, to prepare you for your lover, Elric. One of the blind warriors cried, They no longer resist us, my lord. They limp and allow themselves to be cut down where they stand. Why is this? The mirror has robbed them of their memories, Elric called, turning his own blind head towards the sound of the warrior's voice. You can lead us into a building now, where, with luck, we shall not glimpse the mirror. At last they stood within what appeared to Elric as he lifted his helm to be a warehouse of some kind. Luckily it was large enough to hold their entire force, and when they were all inside, Elric had the doors shut while they debated their next action. We should find Irkun, Divin Tvar said. Let us interrogate one of those warriors. There'll be little point in that, my friend. Their minds are gone. They remember nothing at all. They do not at present remember even what they are, let alone who. Go to the shutters yonder, where the mirror's influence cannot reach, and see if you can see the building most likely to be occupied by my cousin. Divin Tvar crossed swiftly to the shutters and looked cautiously out. Aye. There's a building larger than the rest, and I see movement within, as if the surviving warriors were regrouping. It's likely that's Irkun's stronghold. It should be easily taken. Aye, I agree with you. We'll find Irkun there, but we must hurry, lest he decides to slay Cimmeral. We must work out the best means of reaching the place, and instruct our blind warriors as to how many streets, how many houses, and so forth we must pass.
What is that strange sound?
One of the blind warriors raised his head.
Like the distant ringing of a gong. I hear it too.
And now Elric heard it, a sinister noise. It came from the air above them. It shivered through the atmosphere.
The mirror.
Divum Tavar looked up.
Has the mirror some property we did not anticipate?
Possibly. Elric tried to remember what Ariok had told him, but Ariok had been vague. He'd said nothing of this dreadful, mighty sound, this shattering clangor, as if...
He's breaking the mirror,
Elric said.
But why?
There was something now, something brushing at his brain, as if the sound were itself sentient.
Perhaps Irkun is dead, and his magic dies with him,
Divum Tavar began, but then he broke off with a groan. The noise was louder, more intense, bringing sharp pain to his ears. And now Elric knew. He blocked his ears with his gauntleted hands. The memories in the mirror, they were flooding into his mind. The mirror had been smashed and was releasing all the memories it had stolen over the centuries, the eons, perhaps. Many of those memories were not mortal. Many were the memories of beasts and intelligent creatures which had existed even before Melniboné, and the memories warred for a place in Elric's skull, in the skulls of all the Ameerians, in the poor, tortured skulls of the men outside whose pitiful screams could be heard rising from the streets, and in the skull of Captain Valharic, the turncoat, as he lost his footing on the great column and fell with the shards from the mirror to the ground far below. But Elric did not hear Captain Valharic's scream, and he did not hear his body crash first into a rooftop and then into the street where it lay all broken beneath the broken mirror. Elric lay upon the stone floor of the warehouse, and he writhed as his comrades writhed, trying to clear his head of a million memories that were not his own, of loves, of hatreds, of strange experiences and ordinary experiences, of wars and journeys, of the faces of relatives who were not his relatives, of men and women and children, of animals, of ships and cities, of fights, of love-making, of fears and desires. And the memories fought each other for possession of his crowded skull, threatening to drive his own memories and thus his own character from his head. And as Elric writhed upon the ground, clutching at his ears, he spoke a word over and over again in an effort to cling to his own identity.
Elric! Elric! Elric!
And gradually, by an effort which he had experienced only once before when he had summoned Ariok to the plane of the earth, he managed to extinguish all those alien memories and assert his own until, shaken and feeble, he lowered his hands from his ears and no longer shouted his own name. And then he stood up and looked about him. More than 2/3 of his men were dead, blind or otherwise. The big bosun was dead, his eyes wide and staring, his lips frozen in a scream, his right eye socket raw and bleeding from where he tried to drag his eye from it. All the corpses lay in unnatural positions. All had their eyes open, if they had eyes, and many bore the marks of self-mutilation, while others had vomited, and others had dashed their brains against the wall. Divum Tavar was alive, but curled up in a corner, mumbling to himself, and Elric thought he might be mad. Some of the other survivors were indeed mad, but they were quiet. They afforded no danger. Only 5, including Elric, seemed to have resisted the alien memories and retained their own sanity. It seemed to Elric, as he stumbled from corpse to corpse, that most of the men had had their hearts fail. Divum Tavar. Elric put his hand on his friend's shoulder. Divum Tavar. Divum Tavar took his head from his arm and looked into Elric's eyes. In Divum Tavar's own eyes was the experience of a score of millennia, and there was irony there too. I live, Elric. Few of us live now. A little later they left the warehouse, no longer needing to fear the mirror, and found that all the streets were full of the dead who had received the mirror's memories. Stiff bodies reached out hands to them. Dead lips formed silent pleas for help. Elric tried not to look at them as he pressed through them, but his desire for vengeance upon his cousin was even stronger now. They reached the house. The door was open and the ground floor was crammed with corpses. There was no sign of Prince Irkun. Elric and Divum Tavar led the few Ameerians who were still sane up the steps, past more imploring corpses, until they reached the top floor of the house. And there they found Cymril. She was lying upon a couch, and she was naked. There were runes painted on her flesh, and the runes were, in themselves, obscene. Her eyelids were heavy, and she did not at first recognize them. Elric rushed to her side and cradled her body in his arms. The body was oddly cold. He makes me sleep," she said. "A sorcerous sleep from which only he can wake me." She gave a great yawn. I have stayed awake this long by an effort of will, for Elric comes. Elric is here. I am Elric, Cymril. Elric? You must find Irkun, for only he can wake me. Where has he gone? Elric's face hardened, his crimson eyes were fierce. Where? To find the two black swords, the rune swords of our ancestors, Mournblade and Stormbringer. These swords are cursed. But where has he gone, Cymril? How has he escaped us? Through the Shade Gate. He conjured it. He made the most fearful pacts with demons to go through the other room. And now Cymril slept, but there seemed to be a certain peace on her face. Elric watched as Divum Tavar crossed the room, sword in hand, and flung the door open. A dreadful stench came from the next room, which was in darkness. Something flickered on the far side. Aye, that's sorcery right enough. And Irkun has thwarted me. He conjured the Shade Gate and passed through it into some nether world. Which one I'll never know, for there is an infinity of them. Oh, Eriak, I would give much to follow my cousin. Then follow him, you shall, said a sweet, sardonic voice in Elric's head. At first the albino thought it was a vestige of a memory still fighting for possession of his head, but then he knew that Eriak spoke to him. Dismiss your followers, that I may speak with thee. Elric hesitated. He wished to be alone, but not with Eriak. He wished to be with Cymril, for Cymril was making him weep. Tears already flowed from his crimson eyes. What I have to say could result in Cymril being restored to her normal state. And, moreover, it will help you defeat Irkun and be revenged upon him. Indeed, it could make you the most powerful mortal there has ever been. Elric looked up at Divum Tavar. Would you and your men leave me alone for a few moments? Of course. Divum Tavar led his men away and shut the door behind him. Eriak stood leaning against the same door. Again, he had assumed the shape and poise of a handsome youth. His smile was friendly and open, and only the ancient eyes belied his appearance. It is time to seek the black swords yourself, Elric, lest Irkun reach them first. I warn you of this. With the rune blades, Irkun will be so powerful he will be able to destroy half the world without thinking of it. That is why your cousin risks the dangers of the world beyond the Shade Gate. If Irkun possesses those swords before you find them, it will mean the end of you, of Cymril, of the young kingdoms, and, quite possibly, the destruction of Melniboné. I will help you enter the netherworld to seek for the twin rune blades. I have often been warned of the dangers of seeking the swords and the worse dangers of owning them. I think I must consider another plan, my lord Elric." "There is no other plan. Ercune desires the swords. If you do not, with Mornblade in one hand and Stormbringer in the other, he will be invincible. For the swords give their user power, immense power. You must do as I say. It is to your advantage." "And to yours, Lord Elric?" "Aye, to mine. I am not entirely selfless." "I am confused. There has been too much of the supernatural about this affair. I suspect the gods of manipulating us." "The gods only serve those who are willing to serve them. And the gods serve destiny also." "I like it not. To stop Ercune is one thing. To assume his ambitions and take the swords myself, that is another thing." "It is your destiny. Cannot I change my destiny?" Elric shook his head. "No more than can I." Elric stroked sleeping Cimmeral's hair. "I love her. She is all I desire." "You shall not wake her if Ercune finds the blades before you do." "And how shall I find the blades?" "Enter the Shade Gate. I have kept it open, though Ercune thinks it closed. Then you must seek the tunnel under the marsh, which leads to the pulsing cavern. In that chamber the rune swords are kept. They have been kept there ever since your ancestors relinquished them." "Why were they relinquished?" "Your ancestors lacked courage." "Courage to face what?" "Themselves." "You are cryptic, my lord Elric." "That is the way of the lords of the higher worlds. Hurry. Even I cannot keep the Shade Gate open long." "Very well. I will go." And Elric vanished immediately. Elric called in a hoarse, cracking voice for Divem Tavar. Divem Tavar entered at once. "Elric, what has happened in here? Is it Cimmeral? You look—" "I'm going to follow Ercune, alone, Divem Tavar. You must make your way back to Melniboné with those of our men who remain. Take Cimmeral with you. If I do not return in reasonable time, you must declare her empress. If she still sleeps, then you must rule as regent until she wakes." "Do you know what you do, Elric?" "No, Divem Tavar, I do not." He got to his feet and staggered towards the other room, where the Shade Gate waited for him. And Elric stepped into a shadow and found himself in a world of shadows. He turned, but the shadow through which he had entered now faded and was gone. Old Aubek's sword was in Elric's hand. The black helm and the black armor were upon his body, and only these were familiar, for the land was dark and gloomy, as if contained in a vast cave whose walls, though invisible, were oppressive and tangible. And Elric regretted the hysteria, the weariness of brain which had given him the impulse to obey his patron demon Elric and plunge through the Shade Gate. But regret was useless now, so he forgot it. Ercune was nowhere to be seen. Either Elric's cousin had had a steed awaiting him, or else, more likely, he had entered this world at a slightly different angle, for all the planes were said to turn about each other, and was thus either nearer or farther from their mutual goal. The air was rich with brine, so rich that Elric's nostrils felt as if they had been packed with salt. It was almost like walking underwater and just being able to breathe the water itself. Perhaps this explained why it was so difficult to see any great distance in any direction, why there were so many shadows, why the sky was like a veil which hid the roof of a cavern. Elric sheathed his sword, there being no evident danger present at that moment, and turned slowly, trying to get some kind of bearing. It was possible there were jagged mountains in what he judged the east, and perhaps a forest to the west. Without sun or stars or moon, it was hard to gauge distance or direction. He stood on a rocky plain, over which whistled a cold and sluggish wind, which tugged at his cloak, as if it wished to possess it. There were a few stunted, leafless trees standing in a clump about 100 paces away. It was all that relieved the bleak plain, save for a large, shapeless slab of rock which stood a fair way beyond the trees. It was a world which seemed to have been drained of all life, where law and chaos had battled, and, in their conflict, destroyed all. Were there many plains such as this one? Elric wondered. And for a moment he was filled with a dreadful presentiment concerning the fate of his own rich world. He shook this mood off at once and began to walk towards the trees and the rock beyond. He reached the trees and passed them, and the touch of his cloak on a branch broke the brittle thing, which turned almost at once to ash, which was scattered on the wind. Elric drew the cloak closer about his body. As he approached the rock, he became conscious of a sound which seemed to emanate from it. He slowed his pace and put his hand upon the pommel of his sword. The noise continued, a small, rhythmic noise. Through the gloom, Elric peered carefully at the rock, trying to locate the source of the sound. And then the noise stopped and was replaced by another, a soft scuffle, a padding footfall, and then silence. Elric took a pace backward and drew Aubek's sword. The first sound had been that of a man sleeping. The second sound was that of a man waking and preparing himself either for attack or to defend himself. He said, "I am Elric of Melnibone. I am a stranger here." And an arrow slid past his helm almost at the same moment as a bowstring sounded. Elric flung himself to one side and sought about for cover, but there was no cover save the rock behind which the archer hid. And now a voice came from behind the rock. It was a firm, rather bleak voice. "That was not meant to harm you, but to display my skill in case you considered harming me. I've had my fill of demons in this world, and you look like the most dangerous demon of all, Whiteface." "I am mortal," said Elric, straightening up and deciding that if he must die, it would be best to die with some sort of dignity. "You spoke of Melnibone. I've heard of the place, an isle of demons." "Then you've not heard enough of Melnibone. I am mortal, as are all my folk. Only the ignorant think us demons." "I am not ignorant, my friend. I am a warrior priest of Thum, born to that caste and the inheritor of all its knowledge, and, until recently, the lords of chaos themselves were my patrons. Then I refused to serve them longer, and was exiled to this plane by them. Perhaps the same fate befell you, for the folk of Melnibone serve chaos, do they not?" "Aye, and I know of Thum. It lies in the unmapped east, beyond the Weeping Waste, beyond the Sighing Desert, even beyond Elwar. It is one of the oldest of the young kingdoms." "All that is so, though I dispute that the east is unmapped, save by the savages of the west. So, you are indeed to share my exile, it seems." "I am not exiled. I am upon a quest. When the quest is done, I shall return to my own world." "Return, you say? That interests me, my pale friend. I had thought return impossible." "Perhaps it is, and I have been tricked. And if your own powers have not found you a way to another plane, perhaps mine will not save me either." "Powers? I have none since I relinquished my servitude to chaos. Well, friend, do you intend to fight me?" "There is only one upon this plane I would fight, and it is not you, warrior priest of Thum." Elric sheathed his sword, and at the same moment the speaker rose from behind the rock, replacing a scarlet-fletched arrow in a scarlet quiver. "I am Rakir, called the Red Archer, for, as you see, I affect scarlet dress. It is a habit of the warrior priests of Thum to choose but a single color to wear. It is the only loyalty to tradition I still possess." He had on a scarlet jerkin, scarlet breeks, scarlet shoes, and a scarlet cap with a scarlet feather in it. His bow was scarlet, and the pommel of his sword glowed ruby red. His face, which was aquiline and gaunt as if carved from fleshless bone, was weather-beaten, and that was brown. He was tall and he was thin, but muscles rippled on his arms and torso. There was irony in his eyes and something of a smile upon his thin lips, though the face showed that it had been through much experience, little of it pleasant.
"An odd place to choose for a quest,"
said the Red Archer, standing with hands on hips and looking Elric up and down.
"But I'll strike a bargain with you if you're interested."
"If the bargain suits me, Archer, I'll agree to it, for you seem to know more of this world than I do."
"Well, you must find something here and then leave, whereas I have nothing at all to do here and wish to leave. If I help you in your quest, will you take me with you when you return to our own plane?"
"That seems a fair bargain, but I cannot promise what I have no power to give. I will say only this. If it is possible for me to take you back with me to our own plane, either before or after I've finished my quest, I will do it."
"That is reasonable. Now, tell me what you seek."
"I seek 2 swords, forged millennia ago by immortals, used by my ancestors, but then relinquished by them and placed upon this plane. The swords are large and heavy and black, and they have cryptic runes carved into their blades. I was told that I would find them in the pulsing cavern, which is reached through the tunnel under the marsh. Have you heard of either of these places?"
"I have not, nor have I heard of the 2 black swords, though I remember reading something in one of the books of Fum, and what I read disturbed me."
"The swords are legendary. Many books make some small reference to them, almost always mysterious. There is said to be one tome which records the history of the swords and all who have used them, and all who will use them in the future, a timeless book which contains all time. Some call it the Chronicle of the Black Sword, and in it is said, men may read their whole destinies."
"I know nothing of that either. It is not one of the books of Fum. I fear, Comrade Elric, that we shall have to venture to the city of Ameeron to ask your questions of the inhabitants there."
"There is a city upon this plane?"
"Aye, a city. I stayed but a short time in it, preferring the wilderness, but with a friend it might be possible to bear the place a little longer."
"Why is Ameeron unsuited to your taste?"
"Its citizens are not happy. Indeed, they are a most oppressed and depressing group, for they are all, you see, exiles or refugees, or travelers between the worlds who lost their way and never found it again. No one lives in Ameeron by choice."
"A veritable city of the damned."
"As the poet might remark, aye. But I sometimes think all cities are that."
"What is the nature of this plane, where are, as far as I can tell, no planets, no moon, no sun? It has something of the air of a great cavern."
"There is indeed a theory that it is a sphere buried in an infinity of rock. Others say that it lies in the future of our own Earth, a future where the universe has died. I heard 1,000 theories during the short space of time I spent in the city of Ameeron. All, it seemed to me, were of equal value. All, it seemed to me, could be correct. Why not? There are some who believe that everything is a lie. Conversely, everything could be the truth."
"You are a philosopher, then, as well as an archer, friend Rakir of Fum."
"If you like. It is such thinking that weakened my loyalty to chaos and led me to this pass. I have heard there is a city called Tanalorn, which may sometimes be found on the shifting shores of the sighing desert. If I ever return to our own world, Comrade Elric, I shall seek that city, for I have heard that peace may be found there, that such debates as the nature of truth are considered meaningless, that men are content to merely exist in Tanalorn."
"I envy those who dwell in Tanalorn."
"Aye, but it would probably prove a disappointment if found. Legends are best left as legends, and attempts to make them real are rarely successful. Come. Yonder lies Ameeron, and that, sad to say, is more typical of most cities one comes across on any plain. The two tall men, both outcasts in their different ways, began to trudge through the gloom of that desolate wasteland. The city of Ameeron came in sight, and Elric had never seen such a place before. Ameeron made Doge Cam seem like the cleanest and most well-run settlement there could be. The city lay below the plain of rocks, in a shallow valley over which hung perpetual smoke, a filthy, tattered cloak meant to hide the place from the sight of men and gods. The buildings were mostly in a state of semi-ruin or else were wholly ruined, and shacks and tents erected in their place. The mixture of architectural styles, some familiar, some most alien, was such that Elric was hard put to see one building which resembled another. There were shanties and castles, cottages, towers and forts, square villas and wooden huts heavy with carved ornamentation. Others seemed merely piles of rock, with a jagged opening at one end for a door. But none looked well, could not have looked well in that landscape under that perpetually gloomy sky. Here and there red fires sputtered, adding to the smoke, and the smell, as Elric and Rakir reached the outskirts, was rich with a great variety of stinks. "Arrogance rather than pride is the paramount quality of most of Ameeron's residents," said Rakir, wrinkling his hawk-like nose. "Where they have any qualities of character left at all." Elric trudged through filth. Shadows scuttled amongst the close-packed buildings. "Is there an inn, perhaps, where we can inquire after the tunnel under the marsh and its whereabouts?" "No inn. By and large, the inhabitants keep themselves to themselves." "A city square, where folk meet?" "The city has no center. Each resident or group of residents built their own dwelling where they felt like it, or where there was space, and they come from all planes and all ages, thus the confusion, the decay, and the oldness of many of the places, thus the filth, the hopelessness, the decadence of the majority." "How do they live?" "They live off each other by and large. They trade with demons who occasionally visit Ameeron from time to time." "Demons?" "Aye, and the bravest hunt the rats which dwell in the caverns below the city." "What demons are these?" "Just creatures, mainly minor minions of chaos, who want something that the Ameeronese can supply. A stolen soul or two, a baby, perhaps, though few are born here. You can imagine what else, if you've knowledge of what demons normally demand from sorcerers." "Aye, I can imagine. So chaos can come and go on this plane as it pleases." "I'm not sure it's quite as easy, but it is certainly easier for the demons to travel back and forth here than it would be for them to travel back and forth in our plane." "Have you seen any of these demons?" "Aye, the usual bestial sort, coarse, stupid, and powerful. Many of them were once human beings before electing to bargain with chaos. Now they are mentally and physically warped into foul demon shapes." Elric found Rakir's words not to his taste. "Is that ever the fate of those who bargain with chaos?" "You should know if you come from Melniboné. I know that in Fum it is rarely the case, but it seems that the higher the stakes, the subtler are the changes a man undergoes when chaos agrees to trade with him." "Where shall we inquire of our tunnel under the marsh?" "There was an old man," Rakir began, and then a grunt behind him made him pause. Another grunt. A face with tusks in it emerged from a patch of darkness formed by a fallen slab of masonry. The face grunted again. "Who are you?" said Elric, his sword hand ready. "Pig," said the face with tusks in it. Elric was not certain whether he was being insulted or whether the creature was describing himself. "Pig." 2 more faces with tusks in them came out of the patch of darkness. "Pig," said one. "Pig," said another. "Snake," said a voice behind Elric and Rakir. Elric turned while Rakir continued to watch the pigs. A tall youth stood there. Where his head would have been, sprouted the bodies of about 15 good-sized snakes. The head of each snake glared at Elric. The tongues flickered, and they all opened their mouths at exactly the same moment to say again, "Snake." "Thing," said another voice. Elric glanced in that direction, gasped, drew his sword, and felt nausea sweep through him. Then pigs, snake, and thing were upon them. Rakir took 1 pig before it could move 3 paces. His bow was off his back and strung, and a red-fletched arrow knocked and shot, all in a second. He had time to shoot 1 more pig and then drop his bow to draw his sword. Back to back, he and Elric prepared to defend themselves against the demon's attack. Snake was bad enough, with its 15 darting heads hissing and snapping with teeth which dripped venom, but Thing kept changing its form. First an arm would emerge, then a face would appear from the shapeless, heaving flesh, which shuffled implacably closer. "Thing!" it shouted. 2 swords slashed at Elric, who was dealing with the last pig, and missed his stroke, so that instead of running Pig through the heart, he took him in a lung. Pig staggered backward and slumped to the ground in a pool of muck. He crawled for a moment, but then collapsed. Thing had produced a spear, and Elric barely managed to deflect the cast with the flat of his sword. Now Rakir was engaged with Snake, and the 2 demons closed on the men, eager to make a finish of them. Half the heads of Snake lay writhing on the ground, and Elric had managed to slice 1 hand off Thing, but the demon still seemed to have 3 other hands ready. It seemed to be created not from 1 creature, but from several. Elric wondered if, through his bargaining with Ariok, this would ultimately be his fate, to be turned into a demon, a formless monster. But wasn't he already something of a monster? Didn't folk already mistake him for a demon? These thoughts gave him strength. He yelled as he fought, "Elric!" And "Thing!" replied his adversary, also eager to assert what he regarded as the essence of his being. Another hand flew off as Aubek's sword bit into it. Another javelin jabbed out and was knocked aside. Another sword appeared and came down on Elric's helm with a force which dazed him and sent him reeling back against Rakir, who missed his thrust at Snake and was almost bitten by 4 of the heads. Elric chopped at the arm and the tentacle which held the sword and saw them part from the body, but then become reabsorbed again. The nausea returned. Elric thrust his sword into the mass, and the mass screamed, "Thing! Thing! Thing!" Elric thrust again, and 4 swords and 2 spears waved and clashed, and tried to deflect Aubek's blade. "Thing!" "This is Irkun's work, without a doubt. He has heard that I have followed him and seeks to stop us with his demon allies." He gritted his teeth and spoke through them. "Unless one of these is Irkun himself. Are you my cousin Irkun, Thing? Thing!" Its voice was almost pathetic. The weapons waved and clashed, but they no longer darted so fiercely at Elric. "Or are you some other old, familiar friend? Thing!" Elric stabbed again and again into the mass. Thick, reeking blood spurted and fell upon his armor. Elric could not understand why it had become so easy to take the attack to the demon. "Now!" shouted a voice from above Elric's head. "Quickly!" Elric glanced up and saw a red face, a white beard, a waving arm. "Don't look at me, you fool! Now! Strike!" And Elric put his 2 hands above his sword hilt and drove the blade deep into the shapeless creature, which moaned and wept and said in a small whisper, "Frank," before it died. Rakir thrust at the same moment, and his blade went under the remaining snakeheads and plunged into the chest and thence into the heart of the youth body, and his demon died too. The white-haired man came clambering down from the ruined archway on which he'd been perched. He was laughing. Nehoon's sorcery still has some effect even here, eh? I heard the Tall One call his demon friends and instruct them to set upon you. It did not seem fair to me that 5 should attack 2, so I sat upon that wall, and I drew the many-armed demon's strength out of it. I still can. I still can. And now I have his strength, or a fair part of it, and feel considerably better than I have done in many a moon, if such a thing exists.
It said Frank, said Elric, frowning. Was that a name, do you think? Its name before?
Perhaps. Poor creature. But still, it is dead now. You are not of Ameeron, you two, for though I've seen you here before, Red One.
And I've seen you, said Rakir with a smile. He wiped Snake's blood from his blade, using one of Snake's heads for the purpose.
You are Nehoon, who knew all. Aye, who knew all, but who knows very little. Soon it will be over when I have forgotten everything. Then I may return from this awful exile. It is the pact I made with Orland of the Staff. I was a fool who wished to know everything, and my curiosity led me to an adventure concerning this Orland. Orland showed me the error of my ways and sent me here to forget. Sadly, as you noticed, I still remember some of my powers and my knowledge from time to time. I know you seek the Black Swords. I know you are Elric of Melniboné. I know what will become of you.
You know my destiny. Tell me what it is, Nehoon, who knew all. Nehoon opened his mouth as if to speak, but then firmly shut it again.
No, I have forgotten.
No, you remember. I can see that you remember.
I have forgotten.
Nehoon lowered his head. Rakir took hold of Elric's arm. He has forgotten, Elric. Elric nodded. Very well. But have you remembered where lies the tunnel under the marsh?
Yes. It's only a short distance from Ameeron, the marsh itself. You go that way. Then you look for a monument in the shape of an eagle carved in black marble. At the base of the monument is the entrance to the tunnel.
Nehoon repeated this information parrot fashion, and when he looked up, his face was clearer.
What did I just tell you?
You gave us instructions on how to reach the entrance to the tunnel under the marsh.
Did I?
Nehoon clapped his old hands.
Splendid. I have forgotten that now, too. Who are you?
We are best forgotten, said Rakir with a gentle smile.
Farewell, Nehoon, and thanks. Thanks for what?
Both for remembering and forgetting. They walked on through the miserable city of Ameeron, away from the happy old sorcerer, sighting the odd face staring at them from a doorway or a window, doing their best to breathe as little of the foul air as possible.
I think perhaps that I envy Nehoon alone of all the inhabitants of this desolate place.
I pity him.
Why so?
It occurs to me that when he's forgotten everything, he may well forget that he's allowed to leave Ameeron. Rakir laughed and slapped the albino upon his black-armored back.
You are a gloomy comrade, friend Elric. Are all your thoughts so hopeless?
They tend in that direction, I fear, said Elric, with the shadow of a smile. And on they traveled through that sad and murky world, until at last they came to the marsh. The marsh was black. Black spiky vegetation grew in clumps here and there upon it. It was cold, and it was dark. A dark mist swirled close to the surface, and through the mist sometimes darted low shapes. From the mist rose a solid black object, which could only be the monument described by Nehoon. "The monument," said Rakir, stopping and leaning on his bow. "It's well out into the marsh, and there's no evident pathway leading to it. Is this a problem, do you think, Comrade Elric?" Elric waded cautiously into the edge of the marsh. He felt the cold ooze drag at his feet. He stepped back with some difficulty.
"There must be a path," said Rakir, fingering his bony nose. "Else how would your cousin cross?"
Elric looked over his shoulder at the Red Archer, and he shrugged. "Who knows? He could be traveling with sorceress companions who have no difficulty where marshes are concerned." Suddenly Elric found himself sitting down upon the damp rock. The stink of brine from the marsh seemed for a moment to have overwhelmed him. He was feeling weak. The effectiveness of his drugs, last taken just as he stepped through the shade gate, was beginning to fade. Rakir came and stood by the albino. He smiled with a certain amount of bantering sympathy.
"Well, Sir Sorcerer, cannot you summon similar aid?"
Elric shook his head. "I know little that is practical concerning the raising of small demons. Your Kun has all his grimoires, his favorite spells, his introductions to the demon worlds. We shall have to find a path of the ordinary kind if we wish to reach yonder monument, Warrior Priest of Thum." The Warrior Priest of Thum drew a red kerchief from within his tunic and blew his nose for some time. When he'd finished, he put down a hand, helped Elric to his feet, and began to walk along the rim of the marsh, keeping the black monument ever in sight. It was some time later that they found a path at last, and it was not a natural path, but a slab of black marble, extending out into the gloom of the mire, slippery to the feet, and itself covered with a film of ooze.
"I would almost suspect this of being a false path, a lure to take us to our death," said Rakir, as he and Elric stood and looked at the long slab. "But what have we to lose now?"
"Come," said Elric, setting foot on the slab and beginning to make his cautious way along it. In his hand he now held a torch of sorts, a bundle of sputtering reeds which gave off an unpleasant yellow light and a considerable amount of greenish smoke, but it was better than nothing. Rakir, testing each footstep with his unstrung bow stave, followed behind, whistling a small, complicated tune as he went along. Another of his race would have recognized the tune as the song of the son of the hero of the High Hell who was about to sacrifice his life, a popular melody in Thum, particularly among the caste of the warrior priest. Elric found the tune irritating and distracting, but he said nothing, for he concentrated every fragment of his attention on keeping his balance on the slippery surface of the slab, which now appeared to rock slightly, as if it floated on the surface of the marsh. And now they were halfway to the monument, whose shape could be clearly distinguished, a great eagle with spread wings and savage beak, and claws extended for the kill. An eagle in the same black marble as the slab on which they tried to keep their balance. And Elric was reminded of a tomb. Had some ancient hero been buried here? Or had the tomb been built to house the black swords, imprison them, so they might never enter the world of men again and steal men's souls? The slab rocked more violently. Elric tried to remain upright, but swayed first on one foot and then the other, the brand waving crazily. Both feet slid from under him, and he went flying into the marsh, and was instantly buried up to his knees. He began to sink. Somehow he managed to keep his grip on the brand, and by its light he could see the red-clad archer peering forward. "Elric!" "I'm here, Rakir." "You're sinking?" "The marsh seems intent on swallowing me, aye." "Can you lie flat?" "I can lie forward, but my legs are trapped." Elric tried to move his body in the ooze which pressed against it. Something rushed past him in front of his face, giving voice to a kind of muted gibbering. Elric did his best to control the fear which welled up in him. I think you must give me up, friend Rakir." "What, and lose my means of getting out of this world? You must think me more selfless than I am, comrade Elric. Here." Rakir lowered himself carefully to the slab and reached out towards Elric. Both men were now covered in clinging slime, both shivered with cold. Rakir stretched, and Elric leaned forward as far as he could and tried to reach the hand, but it was impossible, and every second dragged him deeper into the stinking filth of the marsh. Then Rakir took up his bow stave and pushed that out. "Grab the bow, Elric, can you?" Leaning forward and stretching every bone and muscle in his body, Elric just managed to get a grip on the bow stave.
Now I must...
Rakir, pulling at the bow, found his own feet slipping, and the slab beginning to rock quite wildly. He flung out one arm to grab the far lip of the slab, and with his other hand kept a grip on the bow. "Hurry, Elric! Hurry!" Elric began painfully to pull himself from the ooze. The slab still rocked crazily, and Rakir's hawk-like face was almost as pale as Elric's own, as he desperately strove to keep his hold on both slab and bow. And then Elric, all soaked in mire, managed to reach the slab and crawl onto it, the brand still sputtering in his hand, and lie there gasping and gasping and gasping. Rakir, too, was short of breath, but he laughed. "What a fish I've caught! The biggest yet, I'd wager." "I am grateful to you, Rakir the Red Archer. I am grateful, warrior priest of Thum. I owe you my life, and I swear that whether I'm successful in my quest or not, I'll use all my powers to see you through the Shade Gate and back into the world from which we both have come." "You are a man, Elric of Melniboné. That is why I saved you. There are few men in any world. Now, I suggest we continue towards yonder monument on our knees. Undignified it might be, but safer it is also, and it is but a short way to crawl." Elric agreed. Not much more time had passed in that timeless darkness before they reached a little moss-grown island on which stood the monument of the eagle, huge and heavy, and towering above them into the greater gloom, which was either the sky or the roof of the cavern. And at the base of the plinth they saw a low doorway, and the doorway was open. "A trap?" mused Rakir. "Or does your coon assume us perished in Ameeron?" said Elric, wiping himself free of slime as best he could. "Let's enter and be done with it." And so they entered. They found themselves in a small room. Elric cast the faint light of a brand about the place and saw another doorway. The rest of the room was featureless, each wall made of the same faintly glistening black marble. The room was filled with silence. Neither man spoke. Both walked unfalteringly towards the next doorway, and when they found steps, began to descend the steps, which wound down and down into total darkness. For a long time they descended, still without speaking, until eventually they reached the bottom, and saw before them the entrance to a narrow tunnel, which was irregularly shaped, so that it seemed more the work of nature than of some intelligence. Moisture dripped from the roof of the tunnel and fell with the regularity of heartbeats to the floor, seeming to echo a deeper sound, far, far away, emanating from somewhere in the tunnel itself. Elric heard Rakir clear his throat. "This is without doubt a tunnel, and it unquestionably leads under the marsh." Elric felt that Rakir shared his reluctance to enter the tunnel. He stood with the guttering brand held high, listening to the sound of the drops falling to the floor of the tunnel, trying to recognize that other sound which came so faintly from the depths. And then he forced himself forward, almost running into the tunnel, his ears filled with the sudden roaring, which might have come from within his head or from some other source in the tunnel. He heard Rakir's footfalls behind him. He drew his sword, the sword of the dead hero Aubec, and he heard the hissing of his own breath echo from the walls of the tunnel, which was now alive with sounds of every sort. Elric shuddered, but he did not pause. The tunnel was warm. The floor felt spongy beneath his feet. The smell of brine persisted, and now he could see that the walls of the tunnel were smoother, and they seemed to shiver with quick, regular movement. He heard Rakir gasp behind him as the archer, too, noted the peculiar nature of the tunnel. "It's like flesh," murmured the warrior priest of Thum. "Like flesh." Elric could not bring himself to reply. All his attention was required to force himself forward. He was consumed by terror. His whole body shook. He sweated. His legs threatened to buckle under him. His grip was so weak he could barely keep his sword from falling to the floor. And there were hints of something in his memory, something which his brain refused to consider. Had he been here before? His trembling increased, his stomach turned, but still he stumbled on, the brand held before him. And now the soft, steady, thrumming sound grew louder, and he saw ahead a small, almost circular aperture at the very end of the tunnel. He stopped, swaying. The tunnel ends. There is no way through. The small aperture was pulsing with a swift, strong beat. The pulsing cavern. That is what we should find at the end of the tunnel under the marsh. That must be the entrance, Rakir. It is too small for a man to enter, Elric. No. Elric stumbled forward until he stood close to the opening. He sheathed his sword. He handed the brand to Rakir, and then, before the warrior priest of Fum could stop him, he had flung himself headfirst through the gap, wriggling his body through, and the walls of the aperture parted for him and then closed behind him, leaving Rakir on the other side. Elric got slowly to his feet. A faint pinkish light now came from the walls, and ahead of him was another entrance, slightly larger than the other through which he had just come. The air was warm and thick and salty. It almost stifled him. His head throbbed and his body ached, and he could barely act or think, save to force himself onward. On faltering legs he flung himself towards the next entrance, as the great muffled pulsing sounded louder and louder in his ears. "Elric!" Rakir stood behind him, pale and sweating. He'd abandoned the brand and followed Elric through. Elric licked dry lips and tried to speak. Rakir came closer. "Rakir, you should not be here. I said I would help. Aye, but then help I shall." Elric had no strength for arguing, so he nodded, and with his hands forced back the soft walls of the second aperture, and saw that it led into a cavern whose round wall quivered to a steady pulsing. And in the center of the cavern, hanging in the air without any support at all, were two swords, two identical swords, huge and fine and black. And standing beneath the swords, his expression gloating and greedy, stood Prince Elric of Melniboné, reaching up for them, his lips moving but no words escaping from him. And Elric himself was able to voice but one word as he climbed through and stood upon that shuddering floor. "No!" Elric heard the word. He turned with terror in his face. He snarled when he saw Elric, and then he too voiced a word which was at once a scream of outrage. "No!" With an effort, Elric dragged Aubek's blade from its scabbard, but it seemed too heavy to hold upright. It tugged his arm so that it rested on the floor, his arm hanging straight at his side. Elric drew deep breaths of heavy air into his lungs. His vision was dimming. Elric had become a shadow. Only the two black swords, standing still and cool in the very center of the circular chamber, were in focus. Elric sensed Rakir enter the chamber and stand beside him. "Elric," Elric said at last, "those swords are mine." Elric smiled and reached up towards the blades. A peculiar moaning sound seemed to issue from them. A faint black radiance seemed to emanate from them. Elric saw the runes carved into them, and he was afraid. Rakir fitted an arrow to his bow. He drew the string back to his shoulder, sighting along the arrow at Prince Elric. "If he must die, Elric, tell me." "Slay him." And Rakir released the string, but the arrow moved very slowly through the air and then hung halfway between the archer and his intended target. Elric turned, a ghastly grin on his face. "Mortal weapons are useless here." Elric said to Rakir, "He must be right, and your life is in danger, Rakir. Go." "No, I must stay here and help you." "You cannot help. You will only die if you stay. Go." Reluctantly, the red archer unstrung his bow, glanced suspiciously up at the two black swords, and then squeezed his way through the doorway and was gone. "Now, Elric, we must settle this, you and I."